Chapter 7. I did considerable thinking on what Elizabeth Circe had told me about Old Yeller, and finally went and told Ma. "Why, that old rogue," she said. "We'll have to try and figure some way to keep him from prowling. Everybody in the settlement will be mad at us if we don't." "I think somebody'll shoot him," I said. "Try tying him up," she said. So I tried tying him, but we didn't have any baling wire in those days, and he could chew through anything else before you'd turn your back. I tried him with rope, and then with big, thick rawhide string that I cut from a cowhide that was laying across the top rail of the yard fence. It was the same thing in both cases. By the time we could get off to bed, he had done chewed them in two and then was gone. "Well, let's try putting him in the corn crib," Ma said on the third night, which was a good idea that might have worked if it hadn't been for little Arliss. I took Old Yeller out and put him in the corn crib, and the second he heard the door shut on him, he set up to a yelling and a howling that brought little Arliss on the run. Ma and I both tried to explain to him why we needed to shut the dog up, but little Arliss was too mad to listen. You can't explain things very well to somebody who's screaming his head off and chucking you with rocks as fast as he can pick them up. So that didn't work neither. "Well, it looks like we're stumped," Ma said. I thought for a minute and said, "No, Ma, I believe we got one other chance. Try to shut him up in the same room with me, little Arliss, every night." "But he'll sleep in the bed with you boys," Ma said. "And the first thing you know, you'll both be scratching fleas and having mange and breaking out with ringworm." "No, I'll put a cowhide on the floor and I'll have him sleep there," I said. So Ma agreed, and I spread a cowhide on the floor beside her bed, and we shut Old Yeller in and didn't have a bit more trouble. Of course, Old Yeller didn't sleep on the cowhide, and once a good while later, I did break out with a little ringworm under my left arm, but I rubbed it with turpentine just like Ma always did, and it soon went away. And after that, when we fed Old Yeller cornmeal mush or fresh meat, he ate it and did well on it, and never one more time bothered our chicken nests. About that time, too, the vermins got to pestering us so much that a lot of times Old Yeller and I were busy all night long. It was the coons mainly. The coons were ripening into roasting years now, and the coons would come at night and strip the shucks back with their little hands and gnaw the milky kernels right off the cob. And also the watermelons were beginning to turn red inside, and the skunks would come and open one little round hole in the rinds and reach in with their 4 feet and dig out the juicy insides to eat. Sometimes the coyotes would come, eat watermelons too, and now and then a deer would jump into the field and eat corn, melons, and peas. So Old Yeller and I, we took to sleeping in the corn patch every night. We slept on the cowhide that Yeller never would sleep on in the house, and that is, when we did get any sleep. Most of the night we'd be up fighting coons. We slept out in the middle of the patch, where Yeller could catch scent of a coon clear to the fence on either side. We'd lay there on the cowhide, looking up at the stars, listening to the warm night breeze rustling the corn blades. Sometimes I'd wonder what the stars were and what kept them hanging up there so high and bright, and if Pa, way off yonder up there in Kansas, could see the same stars that I could see. I was getting mighty lonesome to see Pa. With the help of Old Yeller, I was taking care of things all right, but I was sure beginning to wish that he'd come back home. Then I'd think a while about the time when I'd get big enough to go off on a cow drive my own self, riding my own horse and seeing all the big new country of plains and cricks and rivers and mountains and timbers and new towns and Indian camps. Then finally, about the time I started drifting off to sleep, I'd hear Old Yeller rise to his feet and go padding off through the corn. A minute later, his yelling bay would lift off some part of the corn patch, and I'd hear the fighting squall of some coon that was caught stealing corn. Then I'd jump to my feet and go running through the corn, shouting encouragement to Old Yeller. "You get him, Yeller! Tear him up!" I'd holler. And that's what Old Yeller would be trying to do, but a boar coon ain't easy thing to tear up. For one size, he'll fight you from sundown to sunup. He's not big for size, but the longer you fight him, the bigger he seems to get. He fights you with all 4 teeth and every tooth in his head, and enough courage for an animal that was 5 times his size. On top of that, he's fighting inside a thick hide that fills a dog's mouth like a wad of loose sacking. The dog has a hard time ever really trying to bite him. He just squirms and twists around inside that hide and won't quit fighting even after the dog's got enough and ready to throw the fight to him. Plenty of times Pa and I seen a boar coon whip Bell and run him off, then turn on us and chase us clean out of the cornfield. It was easy for me to go running through the dark cornfields yelling for Old Yeller to tear up the thieving rascal, but it wasn't easy for Old Yeller to do. He'd be yelling and the coon would be squalling, and they'd go wallering and clawing and thrashing through the corn and popping the stalks as they broke them off, making such an uproar in the night that it sounded like murder. But generally, when the fight was all over, the coon went one way and the Old Yeller he went the other. Both of them pretty much well satisfied to call it quits. We didn't get much sleep of a night while all this was going on, but we had us a good time and saved the corn from the coons. The only real bad part of it was the skunks. What with all the racket we made coon fighting, the scoons didn't come too often, but when one did come, we were in a mess. Old Yeller, he could handle a skunk easy enough. All he had to do was rush in, grab it by the head, and give it a good shaking. That would break the skunk's neck, but it wouldn't be the end of all the trouble, because not even a hoot owl can kill a skunk without getting sprayed with his scent. And skunk scent is a smell that just won't quit. After every skunk killing, Old Yeller would get so sick he could hardly stand it. He'd start a snorting and a drooling and slobbering and often vomit. He'd roll and waller in the dirt and go dragging his body through tall weeds, trying to get the scent off, but he couldn't. Then finally he'd give up and come and lay down on the cowhide with me. And of course he'd smell so bad that I couldn't stand him and have to go off and try and sleep somewhere else. And then he'd follow me and have his feelings all hurt because I wouldn't let him sleep with me. Pa always said that breathing skunk scent was the best way in the world to cure a head cold, but this was summertime, when Old Yeller and I didn't have head colds. We would just as soon leave the skunks stayed out of the watermelon and leave us alone. Working there night after night, guarding our precious bread corn from vermin, I came to see what I would have been up against if I had to do it without the help of Old Yeller. By myself, I'd have been run to death and still probably wouldn't have had saved the corn. And also, look at all the fun I would have missed out if I was alone, and how lonesome I would have been. I had to admit Pa had been right when he told me how bad I needed a dog. I saw that even clearly now when the spotted heifer had her first calf. Our milk cows were all old-time longhorn cattle and didn't give a whole lot of milk. It was real hard to find one that would give more than her calf would take. What we generally had to do was milk 4 or 5 or 6 cows to get enough milk just for the family. But we had one crumpled horn cow named Rose that gave a lot of milk, only she was getting old, and Ma kept hoping that each of her heifer calves would turn out to be as good a milker as Rose. Ma had tried 2 or 3, but none of them proved to be any good, and then along came this spotted one that was just as raw bone and ugly enough to make a good milk cow. She had the bag for it, too, and Ma was certain this time she'd get a milk cow that would replace Rose. The only trouble was this heifer Spot, as we called her, had been snaky wild from the day she was born, and tried to drive her with the other cattle, and she'd run off and hide. Hem her into a corner and try and get your hands upon her, and she'd turn on you and make fight. Ma had been trying all along to get Spot gentled before she had her first calf, but it was of no use. Spot didn't want to be friends with anybody. We knew she was going to give us a pile of trouble when we set out to milking her. I failed to find Spot with the rest of our milk cows one evening, and when I went to drive them up the next day, she was still gone. "It's time for her to calve, and I bet she's got one," Ma said. So the next morning, I went further back into the hills and searched all over. I finally came upon her, holed up in a dense thicket of bee myrtle close to a little seeping spring. I got a brief glimpse of a wobbly, long-legged calf before Spot snorted, and then took after me. She ran me clear to the top of the next high ridge before she turned back. I made another try. I got to the edge of the thicket and picked me up some rocks, and I went to hollering and chucking into the brush, trying to scare her and the calf out. Well, I got her out all right, but she wasn't scared. She come straight at me with her head lowered and bawling with her threats as she came along, and I had to turn tail a second time, and again she chased me clear to the top of that ridge. I tried one more time, and then went back to the house and got Old Yeller. I didn't know if he knew anything about driving cattle or not, but I was willing to bet that he could keep her from chasing me, and he did. I went up to the edge of the thicket and started a hollering and chucking rocks into it, and here come the heifer, madder than ever, it looked like. Well, I yelled at Old Yeller. I said, "Get her, Yeller, get her!" And I hollered, and Yeller got her. He pulled the neatest trick I ever did see a dog pull on a cow brute. Only I didn't see it the first time. I was getting away from there too fast. I'd stumbled and fallen to my knees when I turned to run from Spot's charge, and she was too close behind me to be looking back and watching what Old Yeller was doing. I just heard the scared bawl she let out and the crash of the brush as Old Yeller rolled her into it. I ran a piece further and then looked back. The heifer was scrambling to her feet in a cloud of dust and looking like she didn't know any more about what had happened than I did. Then she caught sight of Old Yeller, and she snorted, stuck her tail in the air, and made after him. Yeller ran like he was scared to death, and then cut back around a thicket. A second later, he was coming in behind Spot, and without making a sound, he ran up beside her, made his leap, and set his teeth into her nose. I guess it was the weight of him that did it. I saw him do it a lot of times later, but I never did quite understand how. Anyway, he just set his teeth into her nose, doubled himself into a tight ball, and swung on. Well, that turned the charging heifer a flip. Her heels went straight up in the air over her head, and she landed flat on her back with all 4 feet sticking up. And she hit the ground so hard it sounded like she ought to bust wide open. I guess she felt that way about it as well. Anyway, after taking that second fall, she didn't have much fight left in her. She just scrambled to her feet and went trotting back into the thicket, lowing for her calf. I followed her, with Old Yeller beside me, and we drove her out across the hills to the cow lot. Not one time did she turn on us again. She did try and run off a couple times, but all I had to do was send Old Yeller in to head her off, and the second she caught sight of him, she couldn't turn fast enough to get headed back in the right direction. It was the same when we got her into the cow pen. Her bag was all in the strut with milk that the calf couldn't hold, and Ma said we needed to get that milk out. She came with a bucket, and I took it, knowing I had me a big kickin' fight on my hands if I ever hoped to get any milk. The kickin' fightin' started. The first time I touched Spot's bag, she reached out with a flying hind foot, aiming to kick my fool head off and coming close to doing it. Then she wheeled on me and put me on the top of the rail fence as quick as a squirrel had ever made it. Ma shook her head. "I was hoping she wouldn't be that way," I always hate to have to tie up a heifer to break her for milking, but I guess there's no other way for this one. I thought of all the trouble it would be having to tie up that spot heifer, head and feet, twice a day, every day for maybe a month or more. I looked at old Yeller, standing just outside the pen. "Yeller, come on in here," I said. Yeller came bounding through the rails. "Why, son, you can't teach a heifer to stand with a dog in the pen, especially one with a young calf. She'll be fighting him all the time, thinking he's a wolf or something trying to get her calf." I laughed. "Well, maybe it won't work, but I bet you one thing, she won't be fighting old Yeller." And she didn't either. She lowered her horns, rolled her eyes as I brought old Yeller up to her. "Now, Yeller, you stand here and you watch her." Old Yeller seemed to know just what I wanted. He walked right up to where he could almost touch his nose to hers, and stood there, wagging his stumpy tail. And she didn't charge him, or run from him. All she did was stand there and sort of tremble. I went back, milked out her strutting bag, and she didn't offer to kick me one more time, just flinched and drew back a little when I first touched her. "Well, that sure beats all. Why, at that rate, we'll have her broke to milk in a week's time." And Ma was right. Within 3 days after we started, I could drive Spot into the pen and go right up and milk her, and all she'd do was stand there and stare at old Yeller. And by the end of the second week, she was standing and belching and chewing her cud, the gentlest cow I ever did milk. After all that, I guess you could see why I nearly died when a man rode up one day and claimed old Yeller. End of chapter 7.